So, Vince, let's dive into this matchup, and we're going to start with, as we always do, the run game.
Yes,
The
this
Notre
is
Dame rush defense against the
yeah.
North Carolina rush offense. This is one of those areas, Vince, when I look at North Carolina, I'm talking about difference between this year and last year's team. They're not close to being the rushing team this year that they were last year. Last year, they were a really, really dynamic group. Obviously, you had two running backs who went over 1,000 yards. Javonte Williams, the second-round pick of the Broncos, who the Broncos aren't playing enough this year, by the way, was their low man in yards per carry last year at 7.3, right? And Michael Carter was at 7.98. Both went for at least 1,100 yards, despite skipping the bowl game. They were a dynamic group that averaged 235 yards per game. They averaged 5.8 yards per carry. This group isn't that dynamic. You look at Ty Chandler, their leading rusher, has 588 yards. He's barely on. I mean, I think he's on pace for 1,000 if you include the postseason, but not real dynamic. The two big differences this year is their run game has been more, has been less dynamic, but it's to me, for when I look at the Notre Dame matchup, Vince, it's more concerning because last year the running backs did the running. Sam Howell last season in 12 games had 146 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. This year in 7 games, he has 494 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. He was at 1.6 yards per carry last year. He's at 5.2 this year. If you look at how Notre Dame has played this season, what are the things that have given Notre Dame problems this year? Mobile quarterbacks. Jordan Travis put 38 on Notre Dame. Notre Dame had trouble stopping Braxton Burmeister, right, as a dual threat guy. That makes Sam Howell, to me, this season a far more dangerous player against Notre Dame than he was last season.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what is going through his head, when he decides to run the way that he does. Like, is it because he doesn't trust his receivers the way he did last year? Is it because he doesn't trust his O-line? Or is it just because, look, I'm a good runner, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to run? And I think you could make a case for all three, or maybe a little bit of a combination of all three. But he escapes the pocket quicker this year than he did last year, and with an eye to run.
I think it's needed. I think that's the reason
I do
why.
too, and I agree with you. Watching this team, the number 11, right, Downs. Obviously, they want to throw to him. I get that. The rest of the guys haven't been as productive as he's had in the past, right? So he wants to run the ball, and I get it. And I'll tell you, because we're talking about the run game, obviously, the Jones kid, I think he runs the ball hard. Like he runs the ball very, very hard. 26, I think, is his number.
Yeah.
I watching him run the ball, Notre Dame is going to have to get after it. He falls forward.
He doesn't really play a lot, though. I mean,
the game that I watched the Florida State game today,
right?
And he was the primary
only
back.
Game. I mean, that was a good game. I mean, he went for 11 for 60 for that game, but he went 12 for 27 against Miami. Those are the only 2 times this year he's really carried it more than 10 times, and I think that right there is a big reason why. I mean, look, Ty Chandler's got 588 yards in 7 games.
Right.
He's had 2 100-yard games this year. Went for 198 against Virginia. Went for a $104 last week against Miami. I think a big reason, and then you look at Jones has on the season 167 yards. After that, their next top running back is Caleb Hood at 82 yards.
Right.
I think a big reason why Sam Howell's been such a bigger part of the run game this season, and you, as you mentioned, they'll do some calls for him. It's not a lot of calls. It's
right.
Just kind of like enough scrambles to keep you honest.
Yeah,
a lot of his stuff is off scrambles, and that kind of, to me, adds to the danger. Like, you almost need to talk about that in more of the pass game than you do the run game.
Yeah,
but I think if you take scrambles away from what he does, it's not a real super potent run game. And to me, this is the area that Notre Dame has to dominate, in my opinion, Vince, because they don't have Michael Carter. They don't have Javonte Williams. And you mentioned DJ Jones. He does run hard, and he brings some size to the table. He's listed at 205. He runs hard. Like you said, he's a physical kid. He'll put his shoulder down. But he's not a kid that necessarily scares me if I'm Notre Dame. I think what makes me when I look at Notre Dame and North Carolina, this matchup, for me, it's all going to be about the line when it comes to just the pure run game. And when I watch North Carolina's line, it's funny, they got 5 starters coming back from last year, but they're not as good as they were last year, in my opinion. And then maybe, and part of it is because that's how good the backs were last year.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But this line, I mean, they're not a real physical line, even though they've got good size, and they get whooped. I mean, they get whooped a lot. I mean, and that's going to be a key for Notre Dame. And that's why I'm a little nervous about Notre Dame going to a 3-down front again this week, because I feel like you're playing right into North Carolina's hands by playing a 3-down front, because they are slow developing, counters, kind of get double teams against these teams. Teams that play 3-man fronts have gotten kind of gashed by North Carolina. Teams that have gone to more aggressive fronts like Florida State did. Florida State stayed in their 4-man and they attacked North Carolina. And yeah, they gave up some big plays, but they also made a lot of plays against North Carolina. And so to me, that's where I'm most nervous, is I'm afraid that Notre Dame is going to go to more of a 3-man front using Isaiah Foskey to drop into coverage.
Yes.
And while that worked against USC, I have a lot of doubts about whether or not it's going to work as effectively against North Carolina. And it's because North Carolina is a far more committed to the run game football team.
Yeah, I concerning the offensive line and watching them play, the Florida State line or defensive line gave them fits, and they were playing games the whole time. And North Carolina didn't do a very good job of picking it up, to be honest with you. And I would say North Carolina's offensive line is average. They didn't do anything to make me say, wow, these guys are really good, but they didn't do anything to make me say, wow, that's Notre Dame at the beginning of the season.
Right.
They're average, right? They at times they have a good pocket, but at times they could be pushed back into Sam Howell too. And so they're a little light in the pants, it feels like, up the middle. And so I feel like that's an area where Notre Dame could dominate. And again, if you can play some games with them, like if they're going to go to a 3 front, you still need to bring 4 every time. And you need to bring 4 from different angles and different spots. And that's fine if you're going to do that. But again, I'd still like to see Isaiah Foskey on the line as an end in that 3 front, not as a linebacker in that 3 front, right? I mean, that's what I would like to see. Let him get after the quarterback on a consistent basis. And I think good things will happen. So if they do that, I don't have a problem with the 3 front. I really don't. But again, you need to bring 4 and 5-man pressures at times from different areas.
And that's my thing is I don't care how they line up. They got to bring more guys to attack the line. You can't attack the line with 3 a lot. And you look at that North Carolina game and the Florida State game, and this is how sometimes numbers can be deceiving. North Carolina ran for 229 yards against Florida State. So you're like, well, okay, you're talking about how you should do what Florida State did. Well, that was North Carolina's second best rushing game of the season. But if you watch that game, a lot of their yards came from Sam Howell scrambles, because Florida State's aggressiveness got him out of rhythm all game long. Sam Howell went 17 of 32, had his second lowest completion percentage of the season, the lowest being Virginia Tech, and went for only 203 yards in that game. Right. And Miami also did a lot of 4-man fronts against them and had success. Virginia Tech did a decent amount of that and had success. So to me, that's kind of been the blueprint, is whether it's 3 or 4 down, it's more about attacking. Teams that attack the North Carolina line for 60 minutes are the ones that have given North Carolina problems and have been able to keep their points down. Now, Miami couldn't keep points down because Miami sucks, and because Miami gave North Carolina some short fields and gave up some big plays. North Carolina had a 12-yard scoring drive against Miami, a 21-yard scoring drive against Miami. Those things helped. They gave up big plays, but they were able to limit the pass game more effectively. And they did. To me, Notre Dame's going to have to do that, but they're going to have to do it with the front. And that's going to be the big key, because if this is about coverage, you're going to have some problem in this game.
Agreed. And I wanted, we were talking about, Sam Howell running the football. Steve says Sam Howell isn't really a burner, though, is he? No, he's not a burner, but you
don't got to be a burner to move the chains, and that's the whole point.
That's exactly my point. He will move the chains for you. He can wiggle enough to get out of some things and move the chains. And look, that's all you need to do to extend drives, right? So He's absolutely good enough to do that, and he's good
Right.
enough to move the. Here's what I would say: he's good enough to move the chains. Plus, like he's athletic. He can run. He's not going to outrun your entire defense. He's not going to do that. But he can make some plays, and if you turn your back on him and man coverage, he'll make you pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. So he's a move the chains plus runner, in my opinion. And
it's
again,
those
it's mostly
plays that then
scrambles.
set up the big plays in other
Yes.
instances. Those
Absolutely.
chain moving plays are what allow them to extend the offense and then make those other plays. And that's the key.
Yes.
But this breakdown ultimately Vince comes down to Notre Dame has to dominate up front.
Yeah.
However they do it, they've got to dominate up front. And that's going to be the key. And if you look at every single game that North Carolina's offense has struggled this year, it's been because Sam Howell has never been able to get into the rhythm.
Right.
Whether it's Virginia Tech, whether it's Florida State, whether it's Georgia Tech, Virginia could not put any pressure on him, and he shredded them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the big thing. And that's one thing that Miami at times was able to kind of rattle him, but at other times couldn't get on him and he could make big plays. So that to me is the key, is you've got to put pressure on Sam Howell. And part of putting pressure on Sam Howell is getting him in second and third and long situations. And in order to talk about the run game, we kind of got to talk about the RPO. So what I want to do, Vince, is I want to transition to the pass game a little bit earlier than normally we would, because there's going to be some bleeding over in this.